Welcome to the summit. Life is love, love is life. And I now have the pleasure to introduce you to Rupert Sheldrake. Welcome.
Hello, Susan.
And I'm very happy you're here. And I I know you have a PhD in biology and you have specialized in plants. You've written about more than 85 scientific papers and many books. And you're also co-authoring in other books. And the books we'll be talking about today, the subject of today, is about, I have one here, science and spiritual practices. And you also have a book right there, Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work. Yeah. And these books are your latest books, and they're about the subject of spiritual practices. And you mentioned like 14 different kinds and really go into depth in every way, both from the scientific angle and also from your direct experience. And so you have the whole 360. It's you're coming from a very wholesome approach, which I really like. And you really go into depth with everything, which is beautiful. So today we'll be talking about, for example, meditation is one way of a spiritual practice. Other ways, you talk about holy days, festivals. There, in plants, animals, and it's basically, yeah, there are even more than what you mentioned as well. But the most common one is like meditation. And you could say, what would you say about meditation? Why is it that works to know ourselves or our true nature?
Well, I would say that probably in the modern world, meditation is one of the most common spiritual practices. There are something like 18 million people in the United States who now meditate. And since the 1970s, it's been investigated scientifically. There are two main forms, as you know. There's either the mantra-based meditation, where you repeat a phrase or a word, or mindfulness meditation, where you watch the breathing or feel sensations in the body. Both of them are ways of coming into the present. And the effects of this physiologically are to reduce blood pressure, to reduce stress. They help people sleep better. There are changes in the brain. The default mode network, the regions, the connected regions of brain activity that underlie ruminations, worry, anxious thinking, etc., become less active during meditation. And people who practice it over many years, like Tibetan monks, undergo actual anatomical changes in the brain. It also helps protect against depression, which is one reason why here in Britain, on the National Health Service, if you go to see a psychiatrist with mild or moderate depression, they can prescribe a course of meditation instead of an antidepressant drug. And that happens because it's been shown in clinical trials that the meditation practice is as effective, if not more effective, than drugs, with far fewer side effects, and of course it's cheaper. So there's now a wide range of studies on meditation. The interesting thing for me here is that it works, whatever your belief system. But when it was developed in Buddhist tradition, Hindu tradition, the Christian tradition, contemplative prayer is what it's always been called in monasteries and convents, and in the Sufi tradition within Islam, people were not doing it so they could, as in the modern world, cope with a frazzled lifestyle or have greater success in love and business, which is one of the reasons why it's often promoted. They were doing it because they thought they were connecting with the very ground of all being, the conscious ground of being. And all religions suppose that there's a kind of consciousness, a form of consciousness far greater than our own, which underlies the universe and is reflected throughout the universe. Hindus often talk about a picture of hundreds of buckets of water at night. And if you look at the moon reflected in each of these buckets, it seems as if it's a separate moon. But actually, although there are hundreds of moon reflections, there's only one moon. And they think that consciousness in us and in all conscious beings is a reflection of one underlying consciousness, and that by meditating we come into contact, more consciously into contact with the ground of our own consciousness. So it's about something much more than just changing neurotransmitter levels and electrical activity in our brains, although of course all that's happening as well. So I think meditation is one of the spiritual practices that's most widely pursued and also most intensively investigated. And what these investigations show, as they do for the other spiritual practices, is basically that these practices make people happier, healthier, and live longer. That essentially that they have measurable effects, and these effects are nearly always beneficial.
Yeah, so it's also for our health, you could say, and but it's meditation. It really can connect you, or maybe make you recognize your true nature, or your beyond the human normal consciousness, or and
Well, it can do that, but the thing is that there are some people who are atheists who meditate. For example, Sam Harris, one of the so-called new atheists, is now giving online meditation courses. So the interesting thing about meditation is it's something that's practiced by hardcore atheists like Harris. It's practiced by a lot of people who are spiritual but not religious. And it's also practiced by lots of people who are religious. So it actually cuts across the entire spectrum of religious belief or non-belief. I myself think it's helpful and instructive to contrast it with prayer, petitionary prayer, which I discuss in my second book, Ways to Go Beyond. And petitionary prayer is very, very common as well, and it's when you ask for something. And if you look across the entire world, in shamanic societies, people pray, in Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian societies, Jain, Sikh, everyone has prayer. And there's a sense in which prayer is like the opposite of meditation. In meditation, you seek to detach yourself from the external world and detach yourself from those thoughts that keep going through the mind. But in petitionary prayer, you start with an invocation to a conscious being greater than yourself. Our Father who art in heaven, Hail Mary, full of grace, Om Namah Shivaya, O Allah. You start with an invocation that connects you with a spiritual being greater than yourself. And then you direct your intention towards problems in your own life or in the life of those around you for which you want help, asking for protection, healing, success, or whatever. Most people pray for very practical, mundane, everyday things, and I do myself. So there's a sense in which prayer is starting from the center, the spiritual connection, and flowing out to the concerns in the world, whereas meditation is withdrawing from the concerns in the world and flowing in. So I think of prayer as like breathing out, and meditation as like breathing in. And in that way, one can see they're complementary. It wouldn't be possible only to breathe in or only to breathe out. I myself do both. I meditate in the mornings practically every day, and I pray in the evenings before I go to bed practically every day. Now, it is possible to meditate if you're an atheist, but it's not so easy to pray if you're an atheist, because prayer by definition involves invoking a spiritual being greater than yourself. And atheists believe that there are no spiritual beings greater than themselves. The entire universe, from the atheist point of view, is unconscious. Most atheists are materialists, and they think that the entire universe is made up of unconscious matter, that animals and plants are just machines, that nature is just mechanical, their body's just a machine, the brain's just a computer. So there's nothing beyond yourself to pray to. However, atheists are a relatively small proportion of the population, and most people believe there's something greater than themselves to which they can pray. Although, I have to say, in the kind of New Age spiritual but not religious movement, I would say that in surveys I've done, meditation is much more common than prayer. And among religious people, regular church goers, mosque goers, synagogue goers, and so on, prayer is probably commoner than meditation. But all traditions include both, and I think that both are valuable. The reason I've written 2 books about spiritual practices, with 7 in each book, is because I think there's a great value in having a range of spiritual practices, not just one. And in fact, all religions cultivate a range of spiritual practices. Singing and chanting, for example, which happens in churches and in synagogues and in places of worship, bhajan singing in Hinduism, which brings people together, connects them with each other through literally bringing them into resonance with each other. Rituals which bring us into connection with each other through participating in the ritual, and also connect us with all those who've done it before, according to my hypothesis of morphic resonance, which is a theory of memory through similarity. Rituals connect us across time and bring the past into the present. And like other spiritual practices, they're about connection, and they connect us with other people, with the divine source to which the ritual is directed, and also with the ancestors, all those who've done it before. And then many religions include other practices like fasting in Ramadan for Muslims, on Yom Kippur for Jewish people, during Lent for Christians. Hindus have many fasts, and shamanic traditions often involve fasting before rites of passage. So there are many of these practices which are part of religious traditions. Pilgrimage is another one. All religions have them. And the practices are about experience, and they can be put within different religious frameworks, or they can be practiced outside a religious framework altogether for people who are spiritual but not religious. And yet they still work.
Yeah, and it sounds to me also all these different practices, religions, spiritual practices, it's about connection a lot. It's about that connection between people. It's the openness, sharing, love. I like to use the word love, and it's also life, right? Because that is life. Everything is life, nature, people, and everything, and the whole cosmos is all energy and life, and it's love to me too. It's energy, merging and transforming, and so yeah. Can you speak about that whole cosmic evolution? And
Well, I think that all these spiritual practices are indeed to do with connection, and they connect with different aspects of ultimate reality, and also, of course, with other people. And what's so interesting about spiritual practices, there are so many different kinds. And I start my book, Ways to Go Beyond, with the spiritual side of sports. Most people don't think of sports as a spiritual practice at all. It seems supremely secular. Yet in the ancient world, sports were sacralized. They were part of a divine activity. The Olympic Games were offered to the gods. They were not just contests to see who's biggest, strongest, fastest, etc. That was part of it, obviously. But this was a celebration of life in the light of greater conscious beings. And I think that sports help to illustrate that that the principle that spiritual practices can have a quite different form, because in a way sports seem the opposite of meditation. For example, in meditation you're sitting still, you're not doing anything to an external observer. So often people have their eyes closed, I do myself, and to an external observer you're supremely still and relaxed. Yet you can also have spiritual experiences through sports. One reason that a lot of people like skiing is the thrill of skiing downhill at 60 miles an hour means you have to be completely in the present. The point about sports is if you're doing them well, you have to be completely present. And that's also the point of meditation. And in some ways, sports work quicker and more effectively at bringing people into the present. I had a friend who was a businessman in America, and he told me that when he was at his busiest in his career, he just couldn't stop thinking. He couldn't sleep properly. His mind was racing. He tried meditation, but that didn't work for him. His mind just wouldn't slow down enough. But he was also a mountaineer, and he said that when he did rock climbing, by the time he was 50 feet up a sheer rock face, he was totally in the present. It was only about where the next finger hold or foothold would be. There was no time to worry about business plans or PowerPoint presentations or whatever. And I think that's true of all sports. If you're in the middle of a football game and someone's passing you the ball and there are crowds cheering in a stadium, you don't have time to think about, did you pay that bill yesterday, or what are you going to say to someone who's pissed you off by saying something that annoyed you? I mean, you just have to be completely present. And then, this is true of all sports. Michael Murphy, who founded the Esalen Institute and was one of the founders of the Human Potential Movement, wrote a book about the mystical side of golf called Golf in the Kingdom, which is a perennial bestseller among golf players, because that kind of mystical side of golf, a complete absorption in what you're doing, is something that takes them to another space. And I also had the chance to have a conversation last year with the world high line, free highlining champion, a young German, and what he did was walk on high lines, like tight ropes, except it's a band, over 1,000-foot drops. He did one over a chasm in British Columbia with a huge waterfall below him. And so I asked him, with no safety harness, and so I asked him just why he did that. And he said that this was the most spiritual experience he'd ever had. He was totally, completely present. When he was halfway across the high line, he knew that one fault, one wobble, and he could plunge to his death. And that concentrated him so much in the present that he said the effect was completely sublime, and that's why he keeps doing it. Most people who do that kind of thing don't last long, and his girlfriend was very worried about it and was obviously trying to dissuade him from this. But the thrill was so great, he kept doing it. As far as I know, he's still doing it. So I think what's happening in sports is that it's a presence that's not a presence of static being in the present. It's a presence of being in the flow. And that's another kind of presence, you see. And I myself think that these things make sense when one recognizes that the central core of ultimate consciousness is not a single undifferentiated unity. According to most traditions, it has an internal differentiation, which is where love comes in. You can't love on your own if you're the only being in the universe. If God or the ultimate reality was purely self-subsistent and had no Can you hear that plane? Is that annoying you, or do you not hear it?
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay, well, I'll carry on.
Yeah.
We don't get many planes now because of the shutdown of so much air travel to Heathrow, which we're sometimes on the flight path to Heathrow here in North London, where I am. Anyway, the ultimate model of consciousness in the Hindu tradition, as you no doubt know, is of Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat is the ground of conscious being. Chit is the contents of consciousness, names and forms. And Ananda is joy or bliss. And another way of looking at it in Kashmiri Shaivism is the knower, the known, and the means of knowledge. The known requires a knower, but a knower can't be a knower without what's known. There's a relationship there. And in the Christian model of ultimate reality, which is the Holy Trinity, as a practicing Christian and Anglican, this is the model I personally prefer. It's very similar to the other ones. The Trinity has three aspects, technically called persons. Oh, sorry, it's a helicopter. I'm going to close my window and try and keep the noise out. It's not Heathrow, it's a very annoying police helicopter. Just a moment. That should be better.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the Holy Trinity. The God the Father is the ground of conscious being, and when this Judeo-Christian God first announces himself to Moses in the incident with the burning bush, and Moses says, "Who are you?" He says, "I am who I am," or "I am that I am," and there couldn't be a simpler or clearer statement of conscious being in the present. I am conscious being in the present, subjective conscious experience in the present. That's the essence of God the Father, the basis of the Holy Trinity. Then the second person of the Holy Trinity is the Logos, the Word, and the Word is very similar to what Hindus call names and forms, nama rupa. It's the content, the forms and shapes of everything, animals, plants, crystals, everything in the universe, and also the forms in our own minds when we can understand and name them. The names and forms go together. And those are the aspects of the Logos, which is also called the Son. And then the Christian belief is that Jesus Christ is the incarnation of the Logos, but the Logos as a principle of eternal divine being is much greater and more encompassing than a limited individual born in a particular place, the Holy Land, at a particular time around 0 AD BC. The Logos is the principle of name and form in the whole universe, the source of all that. And then the Holy Spirit is the principle of movement, change, is breath, wind, air. The flight of birds is often portrayed as a flying dove or pigeon, or flames of fire or flow. It's the flowing or moving principle. And I think that when you think of the Holy Trinity in these ways, then the key point of all this is that within the ultimate divinity, within the ultimate divinity itself, there's relationships. There are relationships of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit with each other. And that's why love is possible within the divine. If there wasn't relationship within the divine, there couldn't be love. So there has to be a relationship within the ultimate source of all things. And I think that the different spiritual practices work by relating to different aspects of the Holy Trinity. I think meditation, getting to the ground of being, the quiet ground of consciousness itself, is relating to the I am that I am, or Sat in Sat Chit Ananda, the ground of conscious being. And I think the kind of spiritual practices associated with movement, like sports and dancing and singing, because all of those can be dancing can be sacred dancing, and most traditional cultures have sacred dances, and singing are about this principle of movement. They emphasize being present in movement, and that is the aspect of the Holy Spirit. And then there are some spiritual practices like contemplating the beauty of architecture, beautiful buildings like temples or cathedrals, or beautiful paintings or sculptures, or my favorite, beautiful flowers. If you're contemplating the beauty of form, then you're really relating to the logos aspect, or the second person, or the chit aspect of Sat Chit Ananda. So I think these different spiritual practices relate to ultimate consciousness in different ways, but they all relate to ultimate consciousness because ultimate consciousness has these three fundamental aspects, and they're all connected to each other. And what connects them with each other is love, and love is at the center of the divine because it's at the center of what's essentially a relationship, conscious relationship.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah. And the Trinity is one as well. Like the spirit, the logos, the ground of being is all one.
Yes, it's all one. It's not, you see, it's misleading to, some people say, oh, it doesn't make sense because God's got to be one, God can't be three. This has been an endless argument between Christians, Muslims and Jews over the centuries. You know, Muslims and Jews emphasize the oneness of God, whereas Christians in mainstream churches, Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, and other mainstream churches emphasize the threefoldness of God, but always seeing it as aspects of the one. And I think that the easiest way to understand how you can have differentiation within unity is to look at the principal metaphor for the Holy Trinity, which is speech. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, right from the very first book of the chapter of the book of Genesis, God has different aspects. There's the ground of being aspect, then there's the movement or dynamical aspect, and then there's the form aspect. And so in the book of Genesis it says the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the deep. Well, the Spirit of God is the wind. It's the word ruach in Hebrew, or pneuma in Greek, means wind and breath and spirit. They're all one word, and wind's included. And if you have the wind moving on the face of the deep, it creates waves. It's like the wind blowing over the ocean. That's the primal image of the Spirit of God. And it then says, and God said, let there be light. And so there's a creative word. Now, if God's speaking a creative word, then the metaphor is speaking, you see. And speech automatically involves this Trinitarian model. Like, I'm speaking now. And to speak now, I'm producing words, and you're hearing the words. But to produce the words, which have form and shape, each word's different, has a different structure, different pattern. But to produce the words, I have to breathe out. If I don't breathe out, the words are silent in my mind. If I just breathe out without words, there's a flow of air, but it has no structural meaning. It's kind of white noise. And when I'm speaking, I'm the speaker, and I'm the source both of the out-breath and of the words. But the words you're hearing, the spoken words you're hearing, can't be separated from the breath that's carrying them, the speaker that's saying them. And yet, it doesn't mean that the words are completely separate from the breath, and the breath's completely separate from me, who am doing the speaking. They're not three totally separate things. While I'm speaking, all three are operating together, intertwined, and yet distinct from each other. You can distinguish between the breath, the words, and the speaker. But when you are hearing the words, all those three aspects are coming together. They form a unity. So that's the primary metaphor underlying the Jewish model of God, right there, in which the Christian Holy Trinity makes more explicit. And there are parallels in Islam. I mean, although Islam insists on the unity of God, God has 99 names or attributes and 99 different ways in which God can be expressed in nature and in the world and in human life. So, and love is one of those aspects. So you can find parallels in other traditions. I myself take the view that all traditions are based on a deep mystical experience of divine love and unity, but then it's refracted through different languages and mythologies and cultural traditions. And so I certainly don't take the view that one's right and the others are all wrong. But I do take the view that religious paths can be helpful, at least for many people. Some people they're not helpful for, but for me and for many other people they're helpful. Even though they're limited and involve limited concepts and so on, because they provide us with ways of thinking about reality. Otherwise, we'd be completely lost if we had to try and work all this out for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, it can be a guidance, you could say, and but it's also like this human body in the world, and it's like life. Life is all interconnected. And so it's like the trinity all over all the time. And so it seems like the human being itself is also God or conscious. It's one with everything. It's connected with everything. It's above, so below. It's like we are already whole. We may not recognize it though. That's probably the point I want to get to. It's a matter of recognizing what we already are, which is already whole and love and everything.
Yes. Well, I think that recognition because it has to come through experience. I mean, it's not very easily communicated by words or theories, but words and theories can help integrate experience with a wider framework. And I think that experience, that mystical experience of connection and unity and love, is something that happens spontaneously to some people. You know, some people have spontaneous mystical experiences in nature, for example, or through near-death experiences. Most people are not seeking a near-death experience through a heart attack or a car accident. They happen to people. But when they happen and people find themselves going out of their body into another realm where they feel joy, love, light, the whole experience may only last a few minutes, but when they come back, most people's lives are changed by that experience, changed forever by just a few minutes of directly experiencing this. Some people experience that through psychedelics. Some people experience it through meditation. Some through sports. Some through all these other spiritual practices. There are many ways of arriving at this experience where one comes to appreciate the love, the joy, the light, the unity that underlies all things. But one of the reasons I myself have been concentrating on in my recent books on spiritual practices is that I think that the practices are what help us to open us to these actual experiences, and it's the experiences that transform us.
Yeah, and the openness, also gratitude is also one that you mention in your books. And, but
Yes.
like that open-minded, open-heartedness, we stay like that in daily life and in meditation and whatever we do, it's like life will serve everything on a platter for us, or it's almost like the openness alone is enough for us to reveal who we really are, this body mind, but also the unconditional love we're made of, or life.
Yes, I'm going to have to go in a second, Susan, but I would just finally say that to stay in that state of openness in adverse circumstances, and we all have to put up with difficult people and accidents and ill health and financial shocks and pandemics and political upheavals and so forth. It's easier to stay in that state of openness if one has these experiences, and especially a regular practice that enables one to connect with this ultimate source, because then one knows that there's this deeper connection, there's a deeper love and joy and so on. And if one doesn't have that strong sense or strong connection, it's only too easy to get depressed or blown off course or disillusioned. So I think that's why regular spiritual practices are so important, because they help us to maintain that sense of connection, which is so important. And maintaining that sense of connection with a greater reality not only makes our lives happier and healthier, but it improves our relationships with other people, because we feel more connected with others as well and less likely to harm them. So I think your summit's very important in dealing with these themes, and I wish you well, and all those taking part in it, in finding personal ways forward and collective ways forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Rupert. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And one more thing, your website, how can people get in touch with you?
I have a website called sheldrake.org, sheldrake.org, and there's lots of links to articles, blogs, etc. there. I also have a YouTube channel with lots and lots of YouTubes and dialogues and so on. So anyone who's interested in following up can do so through my website and YouTube channel.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Right. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.